The June sun hammered down on the Hendersons' backyard like a judge's gavel, unrelenting and absolute. Marcus Henderson stood on his back patio, sweating through his shirt at 9 in the morning, watching a group of neighborhood kids cannonball into his pool for the third day in a row. He didn't know most of them. That was the problem. His wife, Diana, had gone inside 20 minutes ago, unable to watch the invasion anymore. Their own 2 children, Emma, age 7, and Tyler, age 9, weren't even able to enjoy their own pool. They'd retreated to the air-conditioned living room, relegated to video games in their own home during the most beautiful days of summer. "Hey, kids," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking from disuse and frustration. "This is a private pool." One of the teenagers, a lanky boy with a faded basketball cap, turned to look at him with an expression that suggested Marcus had just spoken in ancient Greek. The boy shrugged and dove back under the water. Marcus felt something twist in his chest, a sensation somewhere between rage and despair. He was 43 years old. He owned this house. He paid the mortgage. He paid the property taxes. He maintained the pool himself, the chemicals, the filter, the cleaning, all of it. Every single Tuesday evening, he spent 2 hours making sure the water was safe and pristine, and none of that seemed to matter anymore. He walked back inside where Diana was packing the kitchen. Her arms crossed so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "Did you say something to them?" she asked, already knowing the answer from his expression. "Tried to, they ignored me." Diana exhaled slowly, as if she were releasing years of accumulated frustration with that single breath. "This has to stop, Marcus. I mean it. This isn't normal. This isn't okay." "I know." He poured himself a glass of water with shaking hands. The irony wasn't lost on him. "But how do I tell someone no? How do I stop it without being the neighborhood villain?" "You're already the neighborhood villain if you try to keep kids out," Diana said bitterly. "I heard Linda from 3 doors down telling someone that we're not community-minded, like sharing our pool was some kind of moral obligation." Marcus knew exactly who Linda was. She was the woman with the perfectly manicured lawn and the custom wrought-iron mailbox. She was also the epicenter of all neighborhood gossip, a force of nature that moved through their suburban street like a hurricane with a homeowners association clipboard. But Linda wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was the woman 3 houses down on the other side, the one who'd started showing up at the pool nearly every single day, the one everyone called Karen, though her actual name was Catherine Summers, a woman in her mid-50s with a sharp face and sharper opinions. Catherine had somehow decided that the Henderson pool was a public amenity. It had started innocently enough. 2 months ago, during the first heat wave of the season, Catherine had appeared at the back fence, the one they shared, and asked politely if she could join them for a swim. She was moving through a difficult divorce, she explained. Her ex-husband had custody of her own pool in their old house. She just needed a place to cool off, to reset. Diana, who had a generous heart, had said yes. 1 day became 2, 2 became a week became a standing invitation. And then Catherine invited her sister, who invited her daughter, who told her boyfriend. And suddenly, the Hendersons' backyard had transformed from a private retreat into something resembling a community center. "We need to set boundaries," Diana said, sitting down heavily on one of the kitchen stools. "I love being nice to people, you know I do, but this is insane. I can't relax in my own home anymore." Marcus sat next to her and took her hand. "I'll talk to Catherine today. I'll be nice about it, but firm. No more pool, no more exceptions. We can end this." He sounded more confident than he felt. The problem was that Catherine wasn't the type of person who accepted no. Marcus would learn this about her through a series of escalating interactions, each one worse than the last. He didn't know yet that saying no to Catherine was like trying to push back the tide. He didn't know that she had a gift for reframing rejection as cruelty, that she'd spent 53 years perfecting the art of making herself the victim in every situation. He didn't know that refusing her would set in motion a chain of events that would consume his summer, drain his bank account, and nearly destroy his family. Around noon, Marcus decided to walk down to Catherine's house. She lived 3 doors away in a modest ranch home that had seen better days. The lawn was overgrown. The exterior needed paint. Her divorce, apparently, was not going well financially. He rang the doorbell. Catherine answered after a long moment, still in her swimming suit, her gray-streaked hair wet and hanging limp around her face. She looked surprised to see him, then her expression shifted into something calculating. "Marcus, how nice," she said, her voice coating the words in an artificial sweetness that made his skin crawl. Come in, come in. Actually, I won't take up much of your time, he said, staying on the porch. I just wanted to talk to you about the pool situation. Catherine's smile tightened. What about it? Well, we're really grateful that you've enjoyed having a place to swim, and Diana's been so happy to help you out. He was already making excuses, already apologizing for something he shouldn't have to apologize for. He hated that about himself. But we really need to reclaim our backyard as a private family space. The kids aren't getting to use it, and Diana and I need some time to ourselves. I'm sure you understand. The words came out stilted and awkward, the way a man speaks when he's already bracing for impact. Catherine's face cycled through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, and then something darker. Something that looked like betrayal. I see, she said quietly, and the quiet was somehow worse than if she'd yelled. So I'm just done now. The heat wave's over, so Catherine can go. It's not like that. That's exactly what it's like, she interrupted, her voice rising slightly. I thought we were friends, Marcus. I thought this community looked out for each other. We do look out for each other, but Diana and I have a right to privacy in our own home. I'm sure you'd feel the same way. Catherine's jaw clenched. My marriage was destroyed because of people like you, people who take what they want and then throw people away when they're done using them. The accusation was so wildly untrue that Marcus almost laughed, but the intensity in her eyes stopped him. She genuinely believed this. She'd reframed his boundary setting as betrayal, his need for privacy as cruelty. In her mind, he'd already become the villain. Catherine, I really hope you understand. It's nothing personal. It's completely personal, she said, and then she closed the door. Marcus stood on her porch for a moment, feeling like he'd just made a terrible mistake. He'd expected resistance, maybe some guilt-tripping. He hadn't expected the door to be closed in his face so definitively. He hadn't expected to feel quite so much like he'd done something wrong. He walked back home slowly, the heat of the day pressing down on his shoulders. That evening, after Diana had put the kids to bed, Marcus and his wife sat on the patio. The pool was finally empty of intruders. It looked peaceful now, the water still and reflective, glowing with the last light of the sunset. How did she take it? Diana asked. Not well, she seemed hurt. Diana squeezed his hand. That's on her, not you. But neither of them felt relieved. Both of them had that sinking feeling that they'd opened a door they couldn't close, that there was more coming. The next morning, Catherine's sister appeared at their front door at 7 a.m. She was a smaller, harder version of Catherine, with suspicious eyes and a pursed mouth. My sister is devastated, the sister said, not bothering with a greeting. She's a vulnerable woman going through a difficult time, and you've been taking advantage of her. I'm sorry you feel that way, Marcus said, but we have the right to. You have a right to be human, the sister interrupted. My sister looked forward to that pool. It was the only bright spot in her day, and now you're taking it away because what? Your grass will grow funny. Marcus closed the door. He didn't have it in him to argue further. By that afternoon, Linda from 3 doors down had called Diana, expressing deep concern about their lack of community spirit. By evening, Marcus had received an email from a man named Derek Chen, who lived 4 houses over, suggesting that the neighborhood would be better served if they all pulled together in times of crisis. The consensus was forming. Catherine was spinning a narrative, and the neighborhood was beginning to accept it. The Hendersons weren't just saying no to a neighbor. They were being selfish, cruel, exclusionary. That night, Diana sat at the kitchen table and cried. We're not bad people, she kept saying. We're not, we're just trying to have our own backyard. Marcus held her and said nothing, because he'd already started to understand the ugly truth, that in the court of public opinion, reality often matters less than narrative, and Catherine was very, very good at controlling the narrative. 3 days later, Marcus came home from work to find his wife sitting on the front steps, her face streaked with tears, a notice in her hand. Not a physical notice, but a message from Catherine that had been forwarded to the neighborhood email chain. The email chain that included, apparently, more than 40 neighbors. Diana read it to him aloud, her voice hollow. I want everyone to know what happened to me. I'm a woman dealing with a divorce, living alone, trying to maintain my mental health during the worst time of my life. When I asked the Hendersons, in a moment of vulnerability, if I could use their pool to cool off during the heat wave, they said yes. They made me feel like part of their community, and then once the crisis passed, they threw me away like garbage. They looked me in the eye and said I wasn't welcome anymore. My own neighbor, my friend. They told me I wasn't worth basic human decency. If any of you ever need help, please know that the Hendersons are not people you can count on. Marcus read the email 3 times. Each time, he felt more disoriented, as if he were reading some bizarre parallel universe where he and Diana were the villains in a story they didn't recognize. "This is insane," he whispered. "This is completely insane." "It gets worse," Diana said, and showed him the responses flooding in. 31 of them so far and more appearing in real time. "That's horrible. I thought the Hendersons were better than this. This is what's wrong with society. No sense of community anymore. Maybe we should be organized about this. The Hendersons should know there are consequences for treating people like this. I have to say, Catherine, I've experienced the same coldness from them before. You're not alone." The last one was from Linda. Marcus felt something inside him crystallize. A anger so pure and focused that it burned away everything else. The guilt, the second-guessing, the desire to make peace. "No," he said. "Absolutely not. I'm done. No more pool." "What do you mean?" Diana asked. "I mean I'm going to drain it. I'm going to fill it in. I'm going to remove the whole thing. They want to treat us like villains. I'll give them something to really complain about." "Marcus, don't do anything rash." "I'm not being rash. I'm taking back control of my own property. If Catherine can't use the pool, she can't make it the center of her grievance. If there is no pool, there's nothing to argue about." Diana looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You realize this will make things worse, right?" "How could it possibly be worse?" She didn't answer, but she should have. She should have told him that Catherine would see this as a declaration of war. That some people, when rejected, don't just accept it and move on. They escalate. They mobilize. They find new ways to make their rejection hurt. But Diana didn't say any of that. Maybe she was too tired. Maybe she wanted him to learn through experience. Or maybe, deep down, she wanted the pool gone too, wanted the physical symbol of their violation removed from their property, even if she understood the consequences. Marcus spent the weekend on the phone with contractors. He wanted to drain the pool immediately, but the more he researched, the more he realized that draining a pool wasn't a simple matter. There were environmental considerations, permitting requirements, disposal of chemicals. It would take time and cost money, somewhere in the range of $3,000 to $5,000 to do it properly. He decided to call 3 companies for quotes. 2 of them were professional pool removal companies with websites and insurance. The third was a recommendation from his neighbor Derek Chen, a guy named Joe who did various home improvement jobs and gave good rates. Joe came by on Monday morning. He was in his 60s, weathered and competent-looking, wearing a tank top that revealed tattoos from decades past. He walked around the pool, examining it from every angle while Marcus followed. "Pool's in good shape," Joe said. "Shame to lose it. These things cost money." "I know," Marcus said, "but I need it gone soon." Joe nodded like he understood without needing an explanation. Maybe he did. Maybe this wasn't the first time he'd removed a pool for reasons that had nothing to do with structural failure. "I can start Friday if you want. Drain it, pump it out, haul the equipment, fill and sod over the space. Take me about 4 days if it's straightforward. Run you about $4,500 all in." "That's good," Marcus said. "Let's do it." "You sure about this?" Joe asked, looking at him directly. "Once it's gone, there's no going back." "I'm sure." That was on Monday. By Tuesday, Catherine had apparently noticed Joe's initial site visit because a new email appeared in the neighborhood chain. "I just wanted to warn everyone that the Hendersons are now engaging in intentional sabotage of community resources. They're planning to destroy the pool rather than share it with their neighbors. I think this behavior says everything you need to know about the kind of people they are." "Community resources?" Diana read aloud, her voice a mixture of outrage and hysteria. "It's our pool, Marcus. We paid for it. We own it." "I know." "And she's acting like we're destroying some public monument, like we're not allowed to do what we want with our own property." Marcus didn't respond. He was already past the point of being able to reason with this situation. He felt like he was in free fall, watching the ground approach, unable to do anything about it. Wednesday brought the first real crisis. Marcus was at work. He was a project manager for a mid-sized IT company, a job that usually bored him into a stupor when Diana called him. Her voice was thin with panic. "There are police officers in our backyard," she said. "What? Why?" "Someone called and said we were creating a hazard with the pool. They said we were planning to drain it into the storm drains without a permit and contaminate the neighborhood's water supply." Marcus felt his heart stop. That's completely untrue. We're hiring a professional company to do it." "Well, the police don't know that yet. They're taking pictures. They're talking about citations." Marcus left work immediately. He drove home like a man possessed, images flashing through his mind of some horrifying police raid on his house, of some permanent mark against him and his family. When he arrived, he found 2 police officers in his backyard, taking photographs of the pool. Diana stood on the patio, looking small and frightened. Emma and Tyler were inside, he realized, spared from seeing their home being treated like a crime scene. One of the officers turned as Marcus approached. He was older, with a lined face and the weary expression of someone who'd heard every neighborhood complaint in existence. "Are you the homeowner?" the officer asked. "Yes, I'm Marcus Henderson. This is my property." "We received a complaint about illegal pool draining," the officer said, consulting his notebook. "The complaint alleged that you're planning to drain this pool without proper permits and without hearing a licensed contractor." Marcus took a deep breath. He was so angry he could barely see straight, but he forced himself to stay calm. "That's not accurate. I've hired a licensed contractor. I have quotes from 3 companies. The work hasn't begun yet." "Do you have documentation of the contractor you've hired?" "Yes." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed the officer the email exchange with Joe. "The work is scheduled to begin Friday. All proper permits and environmental considerations will be handled." The officer looked at the email for a long moment. Then he looked at his partner, a younger woman with sympathetic eyes. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. "Okay," the officer said. "From what you're showing me, you're following proper procedure, but I want you to know that we received a very detailed complaint. Someone was very specific about the allegations." "I can guess who," Diana said bitterly. "I can't say who made the complaint," the officer said, though his expression suggested he understood more than his words conveyed. "But I will say that the person claimed you were using this as some kind of revenge against a neighbor who'd been using the pool. They implied the removal was intentionally malicious." "It's my pool," Marcus said, hearing the desperation in his own voice. "I have the right to do what I want with my property." "Legally, yes," the officer agreed. "But if this removal is specifically designed to cause harm to a neighbor, there could be legal complications around that, especially if there's a pattern of behavior." "A pattern?" Diana asked sharply. "What do you mean, a pattern?" The officer chose his words carefully. "I mean that we received additional complaints about harassment and hostile behavior toward a Ms. Catherine Summers. Complaints suggesting that you've been threatening her, excluding her, and now destroying property specifically to punish her." "That's a complete lie," Marcus said. "We asked her to stop using our pool, that's all. That's not harassment." "I'm just telling you what was alleged," the officer said. He'd clearly had this conversation more times than he cared to remember. "I'm not saying it's true, but I'm telling you that if you continue with this removal, and if Catherine Summers takes legal action, you need to be prepared for the possibility that her attorney will argue you did this out of malice rather than for legitimate property management reasons." After the officers left, with no citations but also no reassurance, Marcus and Diana sat in stunned silence. "She called the police," Diana whispered. "Our neighbor called the police and lied." "She's not done," Marcus said, and the certainty in his voice was bone-deep. He understood now that Catherine wasn't going to accept this, that she was going to fight, that the simple act of removing his own pool had somehow triggered something in her, some core wound about rejection and entitlement, and she was going to keep coming at them from different angles. "What do we do?" Diana asked. Marcus didn't have an answer, but he knew he wasn't going to back down. He'd started this, and he was going to finish it. "We move forward," he said. "Friday, Joe comes and removes the pool. We document everything. We keep records of all her communications. If she wants to fight, she can fight, but she'll lose." He sounded confident. He felt like a man standing on a bridge made of paper, watching it dissolve beneath his feet. Friday morning arrived like a deadline Marcus had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Joe pulled up in a truck decorated with the faded logo of Chen's Property Solutions, apparently Derek Chen's nephew, and began unloading equipment before 7 in the morning. Marcus had taken the day off work. He told his boss there was a family emergency, which wasn't technically a lie. This felt like an emergency, like standing on the edge of some personal cliff, about to jump off into an unknown. Diana had kept the kids home from school too. She wanted them away from the neighborhood, away from the potential for any stories or gossip that might filter back to them. They were at her mother's house across town, which meant the Henderson house was quiet, just Marcus and Joe and the machinery. The pool draining process was surprisingly violent. The pump roared to life, and water began flowing out through hoses like the pool was bleeding. The sound was tremendous, not something that could be hidden or done quietly, despite Marcus's half-formed hope that maybe Catherine wouldn't notice. She noticed. By 9 in the morning, Catherine had appeared at the back fence, her face pale and twisted with what might have been genuine shock. She stood there silently for a long moment, watching the water level drop, watching her summer spot vanish before her eyes. "You're actually doing this?" she called out, her voice cracking slightly. Marcus was about to respond when Joe stepped over, positioning himself between Marcus and Catherine like he was a bodyguard instead of a contractor. "Don't engage," Joe said quietly. "Anything you say to her from this point on, she'll use against you. Just let her watch." Joe was right. Marcus had read enough internet horror stories about divorces and property disputes to know that every word could become evidence. Every interaction could be reframed as threatening or harassing. So Marcus said nothing. He watched Catherine watch the water drain away, and he didn't say a word. Catherine remained at the fence for nearly an hour, her presence like a ghost haunting the removal of her beloved pool. Eventually, she walked away, but not before taking several photographs with her phone. By noon, the pool was empty. What had been a gleaming blue rectangle was now a hollow cavity, revealing cracks in the concrete floor, debris collected at the bottom, the ugly infrastructure that had supported the summer oasis. It looked like a wound. "Ugly parts done," Joe said, seemingly unbothered by Catherine's vigil. "Now we pump it out, haul the equipment, break up the concrete, and backfill with soil. Should take 3 days after today." That evening, as the sun set over the city, Marcus checked his email. There were 3 messages from Catherine, each one more unhinged than the last. The first was attempting to be legal in tone. "I am writing to inform you that the removal of the pool on your property constitutes a violation of neighborhood aesthetic standards as outlined in the Homeowners Association guidelines. Furthermore, the destruction of this amenity has caused me emotional distress and violated my reasonable expectation of access to shared community resources." The second was more personal. "You are a monster. You know what this pool meant to me. You know I'm going through a difficult time and you've made a choice to hurt me intentionally. I hope you're proud of yourself." The third was genuinely concerning. "I'm meeting with my attorney on Monday to discuss what legal recourse I have. Don't think this is over, Marcus. Don't think you'll get away with this." Marcus showed them to Diana when she got home. "She's threatening legal action," Diana said, reading the emails with a growing sense of unreality. "She can't actually sue us for removing our own pool, can she?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "That's why I'm calling a lawyer tomorrow." The lawyer's name was Susan Chen, coincidentally Derek Chen's sister, Derek had mentioned, and she operated out of a small office in the downtown area. She charged $200 per hour for consultation, and Marcus already felt the first small avalanche of what would become a massive financial burden. "What she's threatening is frivolous," Susan said after Marcus laid out the entire situation. "You own the pool, you own the property, you have the legal right to remove it. She has no claim here." "Can she sue anyway?" Marcus asked. "She can file anything she wants, but it will be dismissed as frivolous, and she may face sanctions from the court for wasting judicial time. However," Susan held up a finger, "if she can prove that the removal was specifically intended to harm her, there might be some civil liability around intentional infliction of emotional distress." "But I didn't remove it to hurt her. I removed it because it was causing problems in my home." "That's what you say?" Susan said, and something in her tone made it clear she wasn't doubting him, but rather warning him. The problem is, Catherine Summers would argue that the timing and specific knowledge of how important the pool was to her constitutes proof of malicious intent. She has emails where she told you the pool was vital to her mental health during her divorce. She has the neighborhood email where you specifically denied her access, causing her emotional distress. And she has your removal of the pool shortly after she complained about the denial of access. So she's going to twist everything I do into proof that I'm the villain, Marcus said flatly. Essentially, yes, Susan agreed. Is she likely to win? No, but she can create enough of a headache for you to make it expensive and time-consuming to defend against. The question is, are you prepared for that? Marcus wasn't, but he was also not prepared to give in. By Monday, Catherine had indeed met with an attorney. The letter arrived certified mail, requiring a signature that made Marcus's hands shake as he scrawled his name on the receipt. It was a cease and desist letter, threatening legal action for intentional infliction of emotional distress, violation of implied contract, her argument being that by allowing her to use the pool, Marcus had created an ongoing obligation, and what could only be described as a creative interpretation of nuisance law. This is insane, Marcus said, waving the letter at Susan during their emergency phone call. She used my pool for like 3 months. How is that a contract? It's not, Susan said, but that's what discovery and depositions are for. We'll establish that it wasn't a contract. However, I need to warn you, this is going to cost you money to defend against. Even though it's frivolous, you'll need to file a response, and I'll need to charge you for that. We're probably looking at $5,000 to $10,000 minimum to get this resolved. Marcus felt something inside him break. $5,000 to $10,000, on top of the $4,500 for the pool removal, on top of his lawyer consultation fees, on top of the cost of filling in the pool and replanting the yard. And for what? For having the audacity to want privacy in his own home. What if I countersue for her false police report? Marcus asked, hearing the desperation in his own voice. That's possible, Susan said, but counterclaims often escalate rather than resolve things. My advice, let's prepare a strong defense, get this dismissed with prejudice, and move on. She's not going to let us move on, Marcus said. I know she's not. He was right. Over the next 3 weeks, as the pool was fully removed and the hole was being backfilled with soil, Catherine began a systematic campaign of harassment. She called the city code enforcement and reported that the Hendersons were operating an unpermitted construction site. When that went nowhere, because everything they were doing was permitted, she called the HOA and filed a formal complaint that the removal constituted defacement of community property. The HOA, after consultation, informed the Hendersons that they had the legal right to remove the pool, but that the aesthetics of the now empty lot were a concern. The HOA requested that they plant landscaping and install fencing to make it look less like a vacant lot. They want us to fix our own property because we fixed our own property, Diana said, her voice numb with the absurdity of it. But worse was yet to come. One evening, Marcus returned from work to find Diana in tears. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her phone in her hand, and when he asked what was wrong, she just handed him the phone. It was a private Facebook group for their neighborhood, and in that group, Catherine had posted a lengthy narrative about how the Hendersons had evicted her from the pool, how she was a vulnerable woman being persecuted by wealthy neighbors, and how everyone should be aware that the Hendersons were the type of people who hurt others when it benefits them. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the comments. Oh my God, I had no idea Catherine went through all that. The Hendersons seem so nice on the surface. Predators always do. This is exactly the kind of classism I'm talking about. The Hendersons have money, so they think they can treat people however they want. I'm so sorry, Catherine. You deserve better. Would you like to come swim at my pool? You're always welcome here. And dozens more, each one reinforcing Catherine's narrative, each one adding another brick to the wall being constructed around the Hendersons' reputation. She's turned the neighborhood against us, Diana said, her voice hollow. She's actually done it. Everyone thinks we're the bad people. Not everyone, Marcus said, but even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. The neighborhood had chosen a narrative, and their narrative didn't include room for Marcus and Diana's perspective. The corporate world Marcus worked in was small and interconnected in ways he was just beginning to understand. Derek Chen was a client of his company. Derek's sister was the lawyer he'd hired, and Derek's nephew was the contractor doing the pool removal. This meant that Derek was aware of every detail of the situation. Apparently, Derek had made a point of defending Marcus to his other friends at the neighborhood gatherings, and apparently this had gotten back to Catherine. The email arrived on a Wednesday, a formal cease and desist letter from Catherine to Marcus, Derek, and Joe, accusing them all of a conspiracy to harm her, of coordinating against her, of defaming her character. "She's claiming conspiracy," Marcus read aloud, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. "She's claiming I coordinated with Derek to orchestrate my own lawyer and my own contractor as part of a plan to victimize her." This was when Marcus realized something crucial. There was no defeating Catherine. She had unlimited capacity to interpret every action, every relationship, every coincidence as evidence of her persecution. The more he tried to defend himself, the more he proved in her mind that he was guilty. If he said nothing, his silence was proof of guilt. If he spoke, his defense was proof of his conspiracy and his gaslight. The second week of the backfill process, something shifted. The hole in the ground was almost completely filled, just a few more days of landscaping work remaining. But on a Saturday morning, Marcus woke to find police officers in his yard again. This time they came with a warrant. "What is this?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking as he read the document. Catherine had filed a report claiming that the pool removal had damaged the shared property line, specifically that the Hendersons were damaging her fence line by their construction activity. "We need to inspect the site," one of the officers explained. "We're not accusing anyone of anything yet, but there's an allegation of property damage." Marcus walked them around the yard. The fence between his property and Catherine's was intact. It was old, weathered by decades of use, but undamaged. Diana brought out photographs from before the construction began. The photographs showed the fence in the exact same condition, same weathering, same minor separation in one section where the wood had naturally shifted. "Your fence looks the same as it did before construction," the officer agreed. "But we had to check because that's what was alleged." 2 hours later, there were no citations, but there was also no reassurance. The fact that the police had been called again, had shown up with a warrant, had conducted an inspection, all of that was working. All of that was having the cumulative effect Catherine intended. Marcus felt his grip on his own life loosening. It was around this time that the phone calls started. Anonymous, coming from blocked numbers. The first one caught Marcus at work. A woman's voice, not Catherine, but someone hired by Catherine, almost certainly, saying quietly, "We know what you did." Click. There were 6 more calls over the next week, each one just as terse, just as ominous, just as untraceable. When Marcus took the logs to the police, the officer explained that they couldn't trace blocked numbers without a court order, and a court order required proving a genuine threat. These calls didn't quite qualify. "Maybe she's getting help," the officer said, and Marcus caught the implication. Maybe Catherine had realized that Marcus would be better defended against direct confrontation, so she was outsourcing her harassment. Marcus filed a restraining order. The judge granted a preliminary one, but warned that the evidence was circumstantial. The calls and the police visits aligned with Catherine's campaign, but there was no definitive proof that Catherine had made the calls herself. During the hearing, Catherine's attorney argued that the restraining order was itself harassment, that Marcus was weaponizing the legal system against her. Marcus felt the ground disappearing beneath him. By the time the backfill was complete and the landscaping was planted, Marcus and Diana had spent nearly $20,000, $4,500 on the pool removal, $3,500 on legal fees defending against Catherine's frivolous lawsuit, another $4,000 on additional landscaping to satisfy the HOA's aesthetic concerns, and countless hours of his time, all of it unpaid, all of it burning away his peace of mind. And yet Catherine was not done. The lawsuit was officially filed on a Thursday. The formal complaint alleged intentional infliction of emotional distress, breach of implied contract, nuisance, and something the attorney had apparently invented specifically for this case: violation of neighborhood community standards. "This is unbelievable," Susan said, reviewing the suit. "Okay, half of this is going to be dismissed immediately. The contract claim is weak. The nuisance claim doesn't have legs. The community standards thing isn't a real legal claim." "But the intentional infliction of emotional distress?" Marcus asked. Susan hesitated. "That one has a little more weight. If Catherine can prove that what you did was extreme and outrageous and specifically intended to harm her, then there's a theoretically possible claim there. But we'll need to show that the pool removal had legitimate reasons beyond harming her. It did, Marcus said. It absolutely did. I know, Susan said, and we'll prove it, but it's going to take work and it's going to cost money. I'm estimating another $15,000 to $20,000 to fully litigate and win this case. That evening, Marcus sat in his now empty backyard and cried, not because he was sad, but because he was exhausted, because he'd fought so hard to preserve his own home, his own privacy, his own basic right to decide what happened on his own property, and it hadn't mattered. None of it had mattered. He'd won the battle, the pool was gone, but he'd lost the war. Diana found him there at dusk, sitting in a lawn chair looking at nothing. We have to fight this, she said, sitting beside him. We can't let her win. She's already won, Marcus said. She's already destroyed our summer, cost us $20,000 we don't have, turned our neighborhood against us, and gotten our name dragged through the mud. She's won, Diana, she just hasn't admitted it yet. No, Diana said, and there was steel in her voice. She's just started a legal process that we're going to win. We're going to prove that we did nothing wrong. We're going to prove that we had every right to remove that pool. And we're going to prove that she's been harassing us. Marcus turned to look at his wife. She was angry, the kind of clean, focused anger that wasn't despair but determination. And for the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a small spark of hope. You're right, he said, you're right. The discovery phase of the lawsuit began in earnest in late August. Susan subpoenaed Catherine's emails, phone records, and social media communications. She deposed the police officers who'd responded to the calls. She gathered neighborhood emails and Facebook posts. And slowly, methodically, a different picture began to emerge. Catherine's emails revealed something crucial. She'd been planning this campaign before Marcus ever asked her to stop using the pool. There were draft emails to her sister discussing how she could make it work to have access to a pool through the neighborhood, how she could position herself as deserving of sympathy, how she could build her narrative before the community got tired of her. In other words, Catherine had weaponized her victimhood before there was anything to be a victim of. The phone records showed that Catherine had called the police 6 times in the span of 2 weeks, each call becoming progressively more elaborate in its allegations. The police records showed that officers had repeatedly told her they couldn't help her because there was no actual legal violation occurring. The Facebook data, which Catherine's attorney had been forced to provide as part of discovery, showed that Catherine had drafted and redrafted her posts about Marcus and Diana dozens of times, testing different narratives, different phrasings, clearly strategizing about which version would generate the most sympathy and outrage. The smoking gun came in the form of a text message exchange between Catherine and her sister. In one exchange, Catherine said, "I'm going to make sure he regrets this. I'm going to take him down." In another, discussing the pool, Catherine wrote, "Once I establish that he needs to help me and then make it public that he's refusing, the community will force him to let me use it. People care about people in crisis, and I'm in crisis." She was manipulating the system, Susan said, showing Marcus and Diana the evidence. She positioned herself as vulnerable, created a narrative of victimization, and then used public pressure as a weapon. When that didn't work, she escalated to the legal system. But here was the real revelation. Catherine had never expected the pool to be removed. She'd expected Marcus to capitulate to social pressure and allow her continued access. The removal of the pool had genuinely shocked her, not because she'd misjudged Marcus's character, but because she'd never considered the possibility that someone would actually refuse her. Some people live their entire lives assuming they can guilt or pressure other people into giving them what they want, Susan explained. When that doesn't work, they don't recalibrate, they escalate. They assume that if social pressure didn't work, then legal pressure will. And if legal pressure doesn't work, then they'll just keep escalating until something breaks. The lawsuit was beginning to shift. Catherine's attorney realized they didn't have a viable case. The discovery process had revealed Catherine's own campaign of manipulation and proposed a settlement. Catherine would withdraw the lawsuit, and neither side would pursue further action against the other. But Marcus and Diana didn't want a settlement. They wanted the record to show, clearly and definitively, that they'd done nothing wrong and that Catherine had been the aggressor in this situation. "I can file a countersuit," Susan said, But that's going to be expensive and it might just extend this nightmare another year. Do you want to do that? Marcus and Diana looked at each other. The calculus was complicated. They could accept the settlement, move on, and let this be buried in the legal system where it might never see the light of day. Or they could push for a full judgment, which would be expensive and time-consuming, but would create a legal record that vindicated them. "We fight," Diana said. The trial was scheduled for November, nearly a year after Catherine had first appeared at the Hendersons' fence. The courtroom was smaller than Marcus had expected. The judge, a woman in her 60s, named Margaret Whitmore, who had a reputation for not tolerating frivolous cases. Catherine testified first. She painted a vivid picture of her vulnerability, her depression, her reliance on the pool as her lifeline during a horrifying divorce. She cried when describing how the Hendersons had taken away her safe space. She talked about how their rejection had triggered suicidal ideation. But then Susan's cross-examination began. Susan walked Catherine through her emails. She showed the judge the drafts and redrafts of her social media posts. She introduced the text message exchange, where Catherine had explicitly stated her plan to manipulate the community. "Ms. Summers," Susan asked, "when you wrote to your sister that you were going to make sure Marcus regrets this and take him down, what specifically did you mean by that?" Catherine's attorney objected, but the judge overruled. Catherine had to answer. "I just meant that I was upset," Catherine said, but her voice had changed. The vulnerability was gone, replaced with something colder. "You meant you were going to pursue legal action against him." "Maybe, yes." "And you wrote these messages before the pool had even been removed, correct?" Catherine didn't answer. "Yes or no, Ms. Summers?" "Yes," Catherine admitted. Susan then presented the testimony of the police officers, each of whom explained that they'd found no actual violations when they responded to Catherine's calls. She presented medical records showing that Catherine had never been diagnosed with the specific mental conditions she'd claimed the pool was treating. She presented expert testimony that painted Catherine's behavior as consistent with someone who was engaging in a pattern of manipulation and vindictive litigation. Marcus testified that the pool removal had been genuinely about wanting privacy in his own home, that the timing coinciding with Catherine's removal from his life was circumstantial, and that he had no malicious intent toward his neighbor. Diana testified about how the campaign had affected her mental health, how she'd become anxious in her own home, how the constant accusations and threats had been genuinely traumatizing. The closing arguments happened on a rainy Thursday. Catherine's attorney did her best, but the evidence was overwhelming. There had been no intentional infliction of emotional distress. There had been no breach of contract. There had only been a man who wanted privacy in his home and a woman who couldn't accept being told no. Judge Whitmore issued her ruling a week later. She found in favor of Marcus and Diana on all counts. She ordered Catherine to pay the Hendersons' legal fees, approximately $30,000, and in a particularly scathing statement, the judge noted that Catherine's lawsuit itself appeared to be retaliatory, designed to punish Marcus for exercising his legal rights. "Ms. Summers had the right to be disappointed," Judge Whitmore said from the bench, "but she did not have the right to transform that disappointment into a campaign of harassment and litigation. The law exists to remedy genuine wrongs, not to provide a mechanism for punishing people for exercising their legal rights." Catherine's face went white. After the verdict was read, Marcus and Diana sat in stunned silence. They'd won. They'd actually won. But as they walked out of the courtroom, Marcus didn't feel victorious. He felt tired. He felt hollowed out. Yes, they'd been vindicated legally, but the cost had been enormous. The money spent on lawyers, the stress, the year of his life, the damage to his reputation in the neighborhood. Part 8, the aftermath and the final twist. 3 months later, in the dead of winter, Marcus and Diana finally saw the Hendersons' new backyard come together. The landscapers had planted flowering shrubs, created a small garden bed, and installed a wooden fence that separated their yard from Catherine's property so completely that they could no longer even see into her yard. It was beautiful, it was private, it was peaceful. But the victory felt hollow. The neighborhood was still divided. Some people had accepted the court's judgment and moved on, recognizing that Catherine had been the aggressor. But others maintained that the Hendersons had been cruel to push back, that they should have simply accepted Catherine's presence in their backyard indefinitely rather than risk the conflict. Linda had stopped speaking to Diana. Derek Chen, while still a client of Marcus's company, had become distant. The neighborhood barbecues that the Hendersons used to attend now felt awkward and unwelcoming. It was as if Catherine had successfully inoculated the neighborhood against them. Even though she'd lost the lawsuit, even though the judge had ruled against her, the damage to the Hendersons' social standing remained. One evening in March, Marcus was working from home when there was a knock on his door. It was Joe, the pool removal contractor, looking uncomfortable in a way that suggested he was about to deliver bad news. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," Joe said without preamble, "but I figured you'd want to know. I ran into Catherine yesterday at the hardware store. She was telling the clerk loudly so people could hear that the court judgment was rigged, that her lawyer was incompetent, that she's planning to appeal." Marcus felt something sink inside him. Is she actually going to appeal? "Don't know," Joe said. "But even if she doesn't, the fact that she's telling people she is means the story's not over. People believe what they hear first and what they hear repeated. The truth's less sticky than a good narrative." After Joe left, Marcus sat in his empty backyard and understood a fundamental truth about modern life: that you could win every battle and still lose the war. That victory in the legal system didn't translate to victory in the social system. That a person's reputation, once damaged, was nearly impossible to fully repair. The next morning brought an email from Catherine's new attorney. Catherine was indeed appealing the judgment. She'd found a new lawyer who specialized in cases involving community disputes and was arguing that Judge Whitmore had been biased against her. "This could drag on for years," Susan said over the phone. "Appeals can take 18 months to 2 years at minimum." Marcus couldn't do it. He couldn't face another year of this, couldn't spend another $30,000, couldn't live under the specter of Catherine's litigation hanging over his head. He called Catherine's attorney and offered a settlement. If Catherine would withdraw the appeal and agree to stop any further litigation, the Hendersons would accept a mutual settlement where neither side paid the other, and the previous judgment would be vacated. In other words, Marcus was offering Catherine a way to pretend she'd never lost. "Why?" Diana asked when he told her what he'd done. "We won. Why are you giving her this?" "Because I'm tired," Marcus said. "I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of the legal system. I'm tired of worrying about what she's going to do next. I just want this to be over." Diana cried when she heard that, not tears of relief but tears of frustration and defeat. 6 months later, Marcus and Diana had recovered financially by belt-tightening and refinancing their mortgage slightly. Emotionally, they were still recovering. Emma and Tyler had stopped asking why the pool was gone, though they occasionally asked why some neighbors weren't friendly anymore. The neighborhood had largely moved on. Catherine had stopped posting about the Hendersons on Facebook, but the damage was permanent in subtle ways. Invitations to neighborhood events came less frequently. The casual friendliness that had defined their early years in the suburb was replaced with polite distance. One afternoon in September, nearly 2 years after the entire saga had begun, Marcus came home from work to find Diana in the backyard, sitting by the garden, looking out at the fence that separated them from Catherine's property. "I was thinking," Diana said as Marcus sat beside her, "what if we just let her use the pool? What if we just let this go?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "We'd still be letting her use it now. Every day of summer she'd be there and we'd be inside." "Would that have been so bad?" Diana asked, "compared to what we went through?" "Yes," Marcus said, "because it wouldn't have been just the pool. It would have been her establishing that she could demand things from us and we would provide them. It would have been the beginning of the rest of our lives with someone who doesn't respect boundaries." "I know," Diana said, "but sometimes I wonder if the cost of boundaries is always worth the price." Marcus didn't have an answer to that. They sat in silence as the sun set over their peaceful, hard-won backyard, and neither of them spoke the thought that hung between them, that Catherine, by losing, had actually won. She'd taken their summer, their money, their peace of mind, and their place in the neighborhood. She'd done this not by successfully using the pool, but by making the refusal to let her use the pool so expensive and painful that the Hendersons would never again feel entirely comfortable in their own home. Some victories, Marcus had learned, destroy the victor as surely as the vanquished. On a summer morning a full year after the settlement was finalized, Marcus received a phone call from Susan, his attorney. "You're not going to believe this," Susan said. "But Catherine has been sued by the HOA of a community 3 towns over. Same allegations, different homeowner. She apparently moved into a rental situation and went through the exact same playbook with someone else's pool." Marcus felt a strange mixture of emotions. Vindication mixed with a saddening understanding that Catherine's behavior wasn't an aberration but a pattern. She would do this again and again, to person after person, until someone with more resources and less mercy finally stopped her. "What does this mean for us?" Marcus asked. "It means you weren't special," Susan said gently. "You weren't targeted uniquely. You were just the first person who didn't capitulate to her pressure. It means your instinct was right. People like Catherine don't change. They escalate with different targets." After hanging up, Marcus walked into his backyard one more time. The garden was thriving. The grass was thick and green. The fence was weathered but solid. He'd won, he reminded himself. He'd fought and he'd won. But as he looked at the peaceful space that had cost him so much, financially, socially, emotionally, he wondered if winning was ever really worth the price of being right.